Right, welcome back to part two. I'm going through how to use Simple Minds as a planning tool to help you with the comparison piece in paper two, AQA GCSE English Literature. It's the comparison piece that you have to do on the cluster of poems that you've been studying. We ended the last part with structure, and I think there's a suggestion, which I think is a good reading, that there is a cyclical structure in Blake's London. This is in the pink are the notes referring to Blake's London. So verses 1 and 2 talk about the people that are suffering. Verse 3 talks about the causes, and verse 4 goes back to the people that are suffering. In Heaney's Storm on the Island, it is really one verse of blank verse, and but there is some kind of a faint cyclical structure through the half rhymes that appear in the first two lines and the last two lines. So we are prepared, we build our houses squat, sink walls in rock and roof them with good slate. And then we are bombarded by the empty air, strange to the huge nothing that we fear. So in one way, both poems are the same. So how does this relate to the way that they are looking at power? Well, I think one argument can be, one line of interpretation can be, that both poets realize that power is always going to be there, it's always going to return. Heaney, in his talking, uses a natural phenomenon of the storm. The storm's powerful, they can survive it, but they always know a storm will come back. I think Blake's use of a cyclical structure suggests that the power that he observes being abused in London, and he's trying to express in the poem London, will always be there. It's like a circle of imprisonment, if you like. So that's the structure. And I think in comparing the two, you can see that there is some similarity there. In terms of form, I would actually argue, I'm going to bring in another box here to show, and I'll put it in a different color to highlight it. I think both poems could be seen as a dramatic monologue. Heaney's perhaps more clearly than Blake's. I feel that Blake's tone is much more pessimistic and angry from start to finish. Heaney's is a bit more open to interpretation at the end, but they're both using the dramatic monologue to address the reader directly. And I think this is it. They're attempting to make a connection with the reader. So they both try and create a sense that they are one of us, an everyman, if you like. This is particularly prevalent in Heaney's Storm on the Island because he uses more informal language. He says we are prepared, and so the we invites a sense that he's talking about a group of people. He uses other pronouns. So you might think that the sea is company, and other little asides like you know what I mean. So the style of dramatic monologue, it makes I think they're trying to make a connection. They're not trying to be too high-handed or distant from the power that they're describing. And I think they also want us to realize that they are experiencing the effects of the power of nature, and also perhaps the power of discord in society, which I think both poems are addressing. If we look at language and imagery, what I've done here is to draw together the ideas that I've had about the use of language, particularly in the creation of semantic fields. Blake, in his poem, he creates semantic fields and imagery related to control. So you have things like chartered streets, mind-forged manacles. We also have a reference to a symbolic, well, they're not a symbolic group. They were a real group of people, the chimney sweepers, the young boys that were sent up chimneys, the chimney sweepers' cries. Blake used, I felt very sorry for the chimney sweepers, realized that they would go to an early death and were really badly treated. And also cry and fear, the infant's cry of fear. He's building up a semantic field of suffering as well. So we're very aware that the youthful harlots cry, the soldiers sigh. All these people are expressing their emotions through very painful ways. In comparison, and I think this is a slight difference, is Heaney's builds up, particularly at the end of the poem, a sense of the poem, the storm. I'm sorry, the storm being like an army attacking, and I think this relates directly to the deeper meanings of the poem when he's really thinking about the conflict in Northern Ireland and how perhaps one group of people, which he belongs to, which would be the Catholic side, are actually sort of under, they're in a battle, and they're being bombarded by all these difficulties that are like a storm. And so he refers to uses language that come from the battlefield, strafes, exploded, salvo, bombarded, and particularly pummeled. I think that if you explore one of the words, that would be a great one to look at, because pummels is when you're being pounded repeatedly, and you can't get away. Okay, the other area that I think you could go on to and perhaps explore in terms of a comparison is the use of rhythm in both poems. On the pink side here, Blake uses iambic tetrameter, which is 4 metrical beats in the line. So there's 8 syllables, stressed, unstressed. Heaney uses iambic pentameter, which is 5 metric beat, which is 10 syllables, unstressed, and stressed. And in fact, they're fairly regular throughout the poem without necessarily being consistent throughout. And I think that what they're doing here, if you compare the two, they're imposing a regular rhythmical pattern on the poems, because as poets, they are trying to grasp and to bring in these hugely powerful forces that they're trying to explain. The rhythm that they use is an attempt in some way, in some small way, to bring these forces together so they can express what they feel about the power that they're having to suffer and they're experiencing. They break down from time to time, and I think what that shows is that the power of nature, the power of conflict, the power of abuse that we see in the poem London particularly, it breaks through. Okay, so I think I won't go into any more detail, I think you could probably find examples yourself. But if you compare the two, okay, the actual rhythms are different, but what they're trying to do, I think, is the same. And also, I think another area of similarity is the use of oxymoron. Blake actually uses more oxymoron, and we know that, for example, at the Youthful Harlot's Curse, the marriage hearse, I think it's always a disruptive poetic technique, because you're bringing together incongruous and conflicting ideas. And in Blake's London, when he's talking about power, the power of the institutions, they bring upon a disjointing in the way that people look at the world and feel about the world. And so he can show how insidious and permeating the power of these abusive authorities is by using oxymoron. I think with Heaney it's slightly different, because he doesn't use as many or as much. I mean, the one good example is exploding comfortably. I think there's a sense that exploding again is something violent and comes from a military and warlike context. Comfortably is more domestic, and so he's actually trying to talk about this power, this destructive power of the conflict in Northern Ireland, that he sees as being both something domestic and everyday to him, but also very violent. I think, although it's not an example of oxymoron, I think the spits like a tame cat is his attempt to try and emphasize and focus our idea that it's going to be this power is something that is prevalent in his domestic and everyday life. I'm going to have to stop there. There'll be a part 3. Thanks very much.